The humid night clung to Ricky's skin like a second layer of sweat as he stumbled out of the dimly lit cell. The stench of cigarettes and desperation thickened the air. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the knowing hunger of a man who had just lost everything again. The rooster fights had been brutal tonight. Naku parang Rudy konting extension lang. Next week, sigurado na dyan. Next week, ganyan ka na lang ba lagi? Alam mo naman ang patakaran ko. He stepped closer, the scent of comfort and something faintly rotten clinging to him. Pero may ibang paraan. The birds tearing into each other with a viciousness that mirrored the crowd's desperation. Simple lang, may dalawang linggo ka para magpala. Folding threadbare clothes with hands roughened by years of washing other people's laundry. The house was silent except for the occasional scuttle of rats in the walls. She didn't look up when the door creaked open. Kapag may ibang magbabayad para sayo. Ricky had bet it all on the favored labanan, a champion bird with a streak of wins, but the underdog had struck like lightning. The bills inside smelled strange musty, like they'd been buried for years. Ano kang, ako pa ba ang gagawa inike parandito? Ikaw nga, wala namang amba kundi reklamo? And now Ricky's pockets were as empty as his stomach. Perla staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek. For a moment, the only sound was their ragged breathing. Then, from the corner, a small voice. He spat on the ground, the bitterness in his mouth matching the taste of defeat. Around him, men laughed or cursed, their voices blending into the cacophony of the night. Ito without a word, he grabbed his jacket and stormed out into the night, the weight of Mang Rudy's deal settling over him like a burial shroud. Ambang, arawaro, akong, naglilinis, eneke, by eneke, iva, naglalaba, naktitis sa anga, panginsulto ni, haling, alda tapos sasabihin mo walang ambag, ikohang walang kwenta, Ricky, puro sugal, puro utang, pambayat saya tindahan, nakakotang ka na? No man no. Ricky stiffened. He didn't need to turn to know who. It was Mang Rudy's voice was unmistakable, smooth as oil over broken glass. Ang tagal mo nang hindi nakpapakita. He knew what that meant. Favors for Mang Rudy were never just favors. Stories circulated in hushed tones about men who disappeared after taking his deals, their bodies found days later with their chests hollowed out, stuffed with peso bills. But hunger and shame gnawed at Ricky harder than fear. The groceries in her arms, a few kilos of rice, canned sardines suddenly felt like an accusation. Akala ko ba babayaran moyo ako ngayon? Somewhere in the shadows, Mang Rudy watched his presence like a slow-spreading stain. Inside, a single black candle flickered in a room no one was allowed to enter. Everyone knew him, the silent financier of the underground sabong scene, the man who lent money with a smile but collected with something far worse. Ricky had avoided him for weeks, but tonight the debt was due. Parang Ricky, a voice slithered from behind. Ricky swallowed hard, forcing a grin. Mang Rudy's smile didn't reach his eyes. Ricky's pulse spiked. Anong glazing paran, he muttered. Mang Rudy leaned in, his breath hot against Ricky's ear. May trabaho ako para sa... Before Ricky could ask what he meant, Mang Rudy pressed a thick envelope into his hands. At home, Perla sat in the dim glow of a single bulb. Kanina ka pa hinahinta, NG imgabata, she said flatly. Ricky ignored her, tossing the envelope onto the table. Perla's eyes flickered to the money, then back to him. Songaling too. Wala kang pakialam. She exhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around a faded shirt. Alam kong hindi tagaling sa... Ricky's temper flared. Perla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The slap came before Ricky could stop himself. Tay Fei stood in the doorway, her face pale, Ricky's anger drained, replaced by a sickening shame. Somewhere in the darkness, Aling Ald's house loomed, its windows dark, and deep beneath the floorboards, something stirred. The stale air of the early morning clung to Ricky's skin as he stumbled through the narrow alleyways, his head throbbing from cheap gin and the weight of what he'd done. The envelope of money in his pocket felt unnaturally heavy. He should have known better than to take money from someone like Mang Rudy. The door creaked when he pushed it open, the sound too loud in the quiet morning. The money looked normal enough, creased and worn, like any other peso bills, but something about it made his skin crawl. He picked one up, rubbing it between his fingers. It felt wrong, too dry, too brittle, as if it had been left out in the sun for years, and the smell like damp earth and something faintly metallic. Inside, the house was still. The only noise, the soft breathing of his wife Perla, curled up on their thin mattress. She hadn't waited for him. Ano bang pakialam mo? May pera na tayo. Di ba? Di masaya, kakna. Not that he expected her to. Alam mo bang may emga tahong nawawala dahil sa hutang nila sa lalaking Jun. Alam mo bang ito? The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Ricky snapped, though the unease in his gut twisted tight. Pera, pambayat, saya utang natin saya tindahan. Everyone in town whispered about him, about the men who borrowed from him and were never seen again, about the way his smile never reached his cold, dead eyes. But Ricky had been desperate, and desperation made men stupid. As if the bills inside were pressing against the fabric, demanding to be freed. He didn't miss the way Faye's fingers twitched toward the bills, as if she, too, could sense something off about them. His mind was still stuck on Mang Rudy's words, May vang magwawalat para sayo. He couldn't shake the way Mang Rudy had looked at him like a butcher sizing up a pig for slaughter. The house loomed at the end of the street, its paint peeling, its windows dark despite the afternoon sun. It had always given Faye an uneasy feeling, but money was money, and her family needed it. Dala walang linggo the man had said 2 weeks. Alengald had always forbidden her from going there. But today the door at the end was slightly ajar. Ricky spat onto the cracked pavement, trying to rid his mouth of the lingering taste of bile, revealing a small, windowless room. He reached the small, dilapidated house he called home. Just as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, dozens of candles flickered, their wax pooling like blood onto the wood. At the center sat a crude doll, its body stitched together from scraps of fabric, its face eerily familiar, the air thick with the scent of incense and something faintly sour. Faye followed Aling Old to the kitchen, where a bucket of soapy water and a pile of laundry waited, but it didn't reach her milky, cataract-filmed eyes. Ricky hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out the envelope. He peeled it open, letting the bills spill onto the rickety wooden table. He shuddered and dropped it. Perla stirred behind him, her voice thick with sleep. Ricky Aline Gold stood in the doorway, her smile gone, her eyes black and endless. Kasi ang may utang. Madeline Bill. She ran, the old woman's laughter chasing her into the street. He turned, forcing a grin. She sat up slowly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scattered bills. Saan mo nakuha? Hindi mo na kailangang alaman. Perla's face darkened, galing kay Mang Rudy. No. Ricky stiffened masa. Perla's voice was sharp, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Mge, chismis lang yan. Perla opened her mouth to argue, but before she could speak, the door creaked open again. Faye stood in the doorway, her arms laden with groceries, her eyes darting between her parents. Nay, Tay, she began hesitantly. Perla took a deep breath, forcing her shoulders to relax. Pazak, may dala kabang pat. Faye nodded, stepping inside and setting the bags onto the table, her gaze lingering on the money. Kanina papo ako pamela, esa palanki. Ricky grunted, avoiding his daughter's eyes. San ka galing? He asked gruffly, just to fill the silence. Sabay niya link. Aldefe said, straightening nagli. Binayaran niya ako. Perla sighed. Mabuti naman, kailangan natin yan. But Ricky wasn't listening. He didn't like the sound of that. Later that day, Faye returned to Aling Ald's house, the old woman's payment tucked carefully into her pocket. She knocked twice before the door swung open, revealing Aling Ald's wrinkled face. The old woman smiled. Ah, Faye. The inside of the house was dim. Dito ka muna, Aling Ald said, gesturing to the clothes. May ayusin lang oko. Faye nodded, rolling up her sleeves. But as she worked, her attention kept drifting to the hallway at the back of the house. Curiosity gnawed at her. She waited until the old woman's footsteps faded, then crept down the hall. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, an altar stood against the far wall, draped in black cloth. Faye's breath caught. The doll looked like her sister. A floorboard creaked behind her. Sinabi ko bang bawal di? Faye whirled around. Sorry po, Faye stammered, backing away. Ine, nakamali lang. Ako, inehe, alam mo ba kung bakit pinapasok ko ang mehia tulad mo sa bahay? Aling Old interrupted, stepping closer. Faye didn't wait to hear more. She didn't look back, but she should have. The bus ride to the next town took 3 hours, but Faye barely noticed the time passing. Her fingers clutched the armrests so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Faye stepped off, the midday sun beating down on her neck as she scanned the street. Era's last letter had mentioned a house near the old church, one with a rusted iron gate, her mind replaying Aline Old's words on a loop. Faye's stomach twisted as she raised her hand to knock. Madeline Bilhin. Easy to buy. What did that even mean? And that dawai had it looked like Era. Pero kailangan mang mangako na hindi mo ito hirarapit kay nanay. The bus shuddered to a stop in front of a sari store with peeling blue paint. She found it at the end of a dirt path, half hidden behind overgrown bug. The place looked abandoned, the window shuttered tight. Before her knuckles could touch wood, the door flew open. Era stood there, her once round face now gaunt, her arms covered in fading yellow bruises. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. Faye, her voice cracked. Bakit ka ach? She shoved a crumpled envelope into Faye's hands. Ito lahat ng pera ko. Iwi mo kay nanay at wag kang babalik dito kailanman. Si Mang Natoy, hindi siya tao. Faye threw her arms around her sister. Sinon kasama mo? Paso ka muna. Behind her, she heard Era scream a sound that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Faye's shoes stuck to the floor with each step. In the dim living room, a single photo hung crooked on the wall, their parents' wedding picture. The glass cracked down the middle. Bagokamaki, inhaling the sour scent of unwashed hair and something medicinal saglit. Lang, kailangan kitang makausap. Era's grip tightened for a fraction of a second before she pushed Faye away, her eyes darting past her to the empty street. The inside of the house smelled like mildew and stale tobacco. Nagpunta sa bayanan pero babalik. Laging boom. She yanked up the sleeve of her dress, revealing a fresh burn in the shape of a cigar tip. Alam mo ba kung bakit ako pinilit pakasalan nito? Dahil may utang si tatay kay Mang Rudy. At ngayon, her voice broke. Ngayon, binabayaran ko. Amipo ka, Era muttered, pulling the curtains tighter. May sasabihin, ako sa Faye sat on the edge of a stained sofa. Ano nangyari sa'yo? Bakit parang tumakas ka na habang maaga pa? Era's whisper was urgent, her fingers digging into Faye's wrist. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Both sisters froze. Nandito ba siya? Faye breathed. Era shook her head violently. Something heavy thudded upstairs. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Era's face went pale. Nandiyan na siya. The front door slammed open. Era, Mang Natoy's voice boomed through the house, followed by the clump of heavy boots. Era didn't hesitate. She pushed Faye toward the back door, her nails drawing blood. Tekbo! Faye ran. She didn't stop running until she reached the bus station, her lungs burning. Only then did she open the envelope. Inside were 5,000 pesos and a lock of their mother's hair tied with black thread. The scent of burning candles filled Faye's nostrils as she crept back into Alang Old's house, her hands shaking so badly she had to clench them into fists to keep them still. Faye hesitated, her pulse pounding in her ears. She could still hear Era's scream echoing in her mind, the air thick with the cloying sweetness of rotting flowers. The altar dominated the space, draped in black velvet that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light. More of those strange black candles burned atop it, their flames to still, as if frozen in time. Could still feel the weight of that envelope in her pocket. The lock of hair inside had been unmistakable, their mother's, taken without permission. What kind of game was Aling Old playing? She flipped through the pages, her fingers leaving damp prints on the paper. More names, more dates, and then names filled the columns, dozens of them, maybe hundreds each, with a date written beside it. Some had been crossed out with thick red ink. The old woman was Yun Tom Faye, had watched her leave with a basket of laundry slung over her bony arm, humming some tuneless song under her breath. This was her only chance. The forbidden door at the end of the hallway stood slightly ajar, just as it had been the day before. She pushed the door open. The room was colder than the rest of the house. Aline Old stood in the doorway, her lips stretched into a smile that showed too many teeth. She reached out, her gnarled fingers brushing against Faye's cheek. At en familia mo ... But it was the ledger that caught Faye's eye. It lay open on the altar, its pages yellowed with age. Faye turned her head just enough to see it, the doll, the one that looked like Era. Only now, its stitching had come loose, and from the gaps in its fabric, something dark and wet was leaking. Sinasainjo ang kukunin ko? She bolted for the door. Only then did she realize she still clutched something in her hand, a page torn from the ledger, her father's name circled in red. Shoving past the old woman, her heart hammering against her ribs, her father's name jumped out at her. Ricky de la Cruz du 14th of June, that was tomorrow. She grabbed one of the black candles and hurled it at the old woman's face. Faye's breath hitched. Era de la Cruzament received a choked noise escaped Faye's throat. She turned another page. Her own name stared back at her. Faye de la Cruz Collateral. The door slammed shut behind her with a sound like a coffin lid closing. The floorboard behind her creaked. Faye whirled around, the ledger slipping from her fingers. Akala ko ba sinabi kong bawal dito? The old woman crooned, stepping forward. Faye backed up until her legs hit the altar. Bakit nandito pangalan namin? Aling Old chuckled, the sound like dry leaves scraping against stone. Ledger NK MJ Utang. Anak, lahat kayo may preko. Faye slapped her hand away. Hindi kami hayop na pwedeng bili. Pero nabili na kayo, Aling Old whispered. The candle flames suddenly flared, casting monstrous shadows on the walls. Something moved in the corner of the room. Aline Ald's breath was cold against Faye's ear. O ongwang pamilya mo. Faye didn't think. Aling Old screamed a sound that wasn't entirely human as the wax splattered across her skin, sizzling like acid. Faye didn't wait to see more. She didn't stop running until she reached the riverbank, her lungs burning, and beneath it, a single word: tonight. The stench of rotting meat hit Faye the moment she pushed open the door to their home. The single oil lamp in the living room flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows across the peeling walls. Her mother wasn't in her usual spot by the sewing machine. The house felt as still, too quiet, like the air before a storm breaks. Faye didn't want to look down. She already knew it wasn't water. Nene, Faye called out, her voice cracking. No answer. She stepped further inside, her sandals sticking to the floor with each step. Something wet and dark seeped between the bamboo slats. A low, wet, gurgling sound came from the bedroom. Faye's hand shook as she reached for the curtains separating the rooms. Her arms wrapped around herself, rocking back and forth. Her fingers were red up to the elbows. The fabric felt strangely stiff between her fingers, like dried leather. She pulled it aside. The sight made her stomach heave. The smell was everywhere, now coppery blood, and that same earthy decay from Aling Old's money. We have to go, she choked out. Now, before they come back. Go where? The handwriting was elegant. Looping Mangrudi owns this town, owns us. Take your sister's money and run. Don't look back. She reached into the cavity of Ricky's chest and pulled out a folded slip of paper lodged between the bills. They left this too. Faye grabbed her mother's arm. She pressed something cold into Faye's palm, a rusted kitchen knife. But I'll make them work for it. They'll kill you. Her father lay sprawled across their sleeping mat, his chest split open like a butchered pig. His ribs jutted outward in jagged spikes. The hollow cavity where his heart should have been stuffed with Pasobil's old ones. The same musty kind Aling Gold always paid with. His eyes were wide open, glassy with terror. His mouth stretched in a silent scream. At the foot of the bed, Perla knelt, in a pool of blood. They came after sunset, Perla whispered, not looking up. 3 of them. They didn't even knock. Faye couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Perla finally lifted her head. Her eyes were wrong, too wide, too bright. They left a message, she said, her voice eerily calm. She held up a single black candle, the wax still warm. For you? Faye's knees gave out. She collapsed next to her father's body, her fingers brushing against the bills stuffed inside him. They came away sticky. Perla. Laughter broken, hollow sound. Faye unfolded it with trembling fingers. 1 debt paid, one remains. We will collect at midnight. Outside, the church bell tolled 11 times. Perla stood abruptly, sending droplets of blood spattering across the floor. And leave you here. Perla's smile was terrible to see. No, anak. They'll do worse. Somewhere in the distance, dogs began to howl. The bell tolled again. It wasn't the church bell. Faye realized with dawning horror that the sound was coming from inside the house from under the floorboards. Something was answering the call. The knife felt like a living thing in Faye's hand, its jagged edge catching the dim light as she backed toward the door. The howling beneath the floorboards had risen to a fever pitch, not dogs, not anything natural, but a chorus of voices screaming in unison. Her mother stood between her and the bedroom, arms outstretched like some martyred saint. Faye caught only glimpses, a tangle of limbs, too long to be human, fingers ending in hooked claws, a gaping maw lined with yellowed teeth. For her mother was upon it, the kitchen knife flashing, her bloodied dress clinging to her thin frame. Gold, Perla hissed, her eyes wild. Before the floor exploded upward. Splintered bamboo and rotting planks erupted in a shower of debris as something massive and black surged from below. The thing shrieked, a sound that shattered the remaining glass in the windows. Perla's first strike found its mark, plunging the blade deep into one bulbous eye, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the broken stained glass. And yet, she turned and ran, didn't look back when the first flames licked up the sides of the house, just ran, her lungs burning. At first, Faye thought it was her mother. Then the moonlight hit its face, and she had to bite down on her scream. The envelope of Era's money clutched tight against her chest, the fingers twisted at unnatural angles. But her eyes, those were still auras, filled with terror, filled with recognition. The trees seemed to reach for her as she passed, their branches clawing at her arms and face. The screams of her mother and the thing chasing her, blending into a single, terrible wail. There, between the rotting pews, a single black candle flickered, its wax nearly gone. The night air hit her face like a slap as she burst from the house, her bare feet slapping against the muddy path. Behind her, the walls of the house bulged inward, as if something enormous was trying to force its way out. Black ichor sprayed across the walls, sizzling where it touched the wood like acid. Faye didn't wait to see more. The stone floor was cold against her cheek, the scent of mildew and old incense thick in her nose. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped in a steady rhythm. She didn't stop at the road. It wasn't until she reached the abandoned chapel at the edge of town that she collapsed, her legs giving out beneath her. Faye didn't know how long she lay there before the whispering started. At first, she thought it was the wind. Then the words became clear. You can't outrun a dead little one. She sat up slowly, her muscles screaming in protest. The chapel was empty. Movement near the altar. A figure emerged from the shadows, its steps uneven. It was Era, or what was left of her. Her sister's once beautiful face was sunken, her lips stitched shut with coarse black thread. Her arms hung limp at her sides. Run. Era's voice gurgled from somewhere deep in her ruined throat. Before the candle burns out, Faye followed her sister's gaze to the chapel's altar, and in the growing darkness beyond it, shapes began to move. The candle's dying flame cast grotesque shadows that slithered up the chapel walls as Faye scrambled backward, her hands slipping on damp stone. Error, the thing wherein Era's skin took another jerking step forward, her stitched mouth trembling as if trying to form words the threads wouldn't allow. The shapes behind the altar solidified. Mang Rudy emerged first, his fine silk shirt streaked with grave dirt, his fingernails blackened and curled like claws. A lean old followed, her spine bent at an impossible angle, her milky eyes fixed on Faye, and behind them, shifting in the darkness, the candle guttered, its flame shrinking to a blue ember. She held up a crude doll, this one with Faye's wide eyes, stitched in black thread. Puede na tayong magsimula. Something far worse, a mass of glistening limbs and too many teeth, its breath reeking of spoiled meat and old coins. The Dela Cruz women, Mang Rudy sighed, running a rotting tongue over cracked lips. Always so difficult to collect. Faye's back hit the chapel wall, black ichor spraying as he clawed at his own eyes. Aling old collapse, her bones snapping like dry twigs as she curled in on herself. Aline Ald giggled, a sound like breaking glass. pero ang ganda enehe koyateral natin ng galon. She hurled it at the altar where the baptismal font stood filled with stagnant water. Era lunged. Clever, it rumbled, stepping into the moonlight. Not at Faye at the candle. Not candle! She gasped through the blood. The water, holy, from the font. Her ruined hands closed around the base as the last of the wax pooled with a strength that shouldn't have been possible. The moment flame touched water, the chapel erupted, all squirming around a gaping, toothless mouth. It shrieked, the sound-piercing Faye's eardrums as it flailed, the holy water eating through its form like acid, not in fire and sound, her body deflating like a punctured wineskin. A scream so vast it shook the foundations, tore through the air, the stained glass windows shattering outward. Mang Rudy's face split open like overripe fruit. Behind her, the chapel stood empty. No bades, no monsters, just dust and silence. And the thing behind them, shaped like a cross end, drove it into the heart of the squirming mass. The peso bills, inside fluttering like moth wings as it spread its arms. But a candle won't kill what's already dead. With her own face, where the president should have been, it laughed. A deep, wet chuckle that made Faye's teeth vibrate. Faye's breath caught. The creature wore her father's face. Ricky's hollow chest yawned open. Era grabbed Faye's wrist, her stitched lips parting with a terrible ripping sound. Understanding dawned. Faye didn't hesitate. She plunged both hands into the baptismal font and hurled the stagnant water at the thing wearing her father's skin. The effect was instantaneous. Ricky's face melted like wax, the flesh sloughing off to reveal the horror beneath a writhing mass of centipedes and rotting peso bills. Mang Rudy was already crawling toward the door, his legs dragging uselessly behind him. Aling Old had stopped moving entirely. Era collapsed, her stitches unraveling as the life finally left her eyes. Finish it, she whispered. Faye grabbed the fallen candle holder, cold iron. The chapel fell silent. Dawn's first light filtered through the broken windows as Faye staggered outside, her clothes stiff with dried blood and holy water. In her pocket, something rustled. Faye pulled out a single peso bill, fresh and crisp. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. The debt was paid, but the ledger was never closed.